Hollywood comes up with all sorts of nonsense to justify remakes. They're reimagining a classic for a new era, they're telling the story in a way people haven't seen before, they're just giving the audience what it wants, etc, etc. Well, have a think on this. The pulse to do a remake is never creative, because all of the grunt work has already been done, and any story changes are usually cosmetic. The pulse is financial, hence the reboots of horror movies with several sequels and spin-offs. If a wet fart of a movie like Platinum Dune's Texas Chainsaw Massacre reboot can launch a franchise, then you have to wonder about the remakes that didn't merit so much as an in-name only sequel with a different cast. Even the House on Haunted Hill remake got one of those, so we must be really talking about the bottom of the remake barrel. And so here are some of the movies so soulless that no studio was willing to roll the dice on another one, regardless of their box office performance. I am Kirsten from What Culture, and these are 10 horror remakes so bad they never got a sequel. Number 10. Prom Night. If you haven't seen the 1980 original, it paired Jamie Lee Curtis with, why not, Leslie Nielsen. So the people behind this remake sensibly ignore it and start over. Unfortunately, those people are Nelson McCormick and J.S. Cardone, the creative duo behind the Stepfather remake, so it's still a lame and forgettable effort. All you need to know about the plot is that Donna, played by Brittany Snow, is preparing for her senior prom when teacher turned wacko Ramsey, who attacked her 3 years earlier, escapes from the booby hatch and comes after her, pursued by some inept cops. So it's 88 minutes of then she woke up, false scares, and bimbos wandering off by themselves. Plus, there's a pure evil villain who changes his appearance by shaving and wearing a baseball cap, which of course allows him to evade capture until the climax. Number 9. One Missed Call. Let's say that you're being haunted by a ghost who's using cell phones to take revenge on the living, and you receive a call informing you of the date and time of your death. What would you do? Well, according to One Missed Call, you should accept a sleazy producer's offer to be exercised on a reality show. That's what Taylor decides to do, and picture her best friend's surprise when she sees the trailer. A cell phone rings and death is on the line. A beautiful co-ed, a ticking clock of ghastly murder. Next on American Miracles. However, that's nothing compared to the reaction of the fire and brimstone exorcist who can't figure out why the exploding lights, choking starlet, and sudden appearance of the Antichrist weren't in the script. This is the American remake of a Japanese ripoff of The Ring, but whereas Takashi Miike's 2003 film spawned 2 so bad they're good sequels, this so bad it's worthless version tanked at the box office and helped kill the J-horror trend. Number 8. Psycho. Remaking Hitchcock is a dicey proposition at best, but when it's the movie credited with bringing the horror film out of gothic castles and into the modern era, you'd better have a damn good reason for doing so. Determined to court disaster, Gus Van Sant stages a shot-for-shot remake, albeit with occasional new touches, of a movie shot in 1960, which works surprisingly well if his intention was to suck all the life out of the material. It's Hitchcock's movie in colour, with all the fancy camera movements the technology of the time didn't allow, but the result is so dull and stilted you have to wonder why Van Sant bothered. No wonder the 3 sequels never got the same treatment. The final insult is the casting. Watching Anne Heche flail around hopelessly in Janet Leigh's role is one thing, but who in their right mind cast Vince Vaughn as a schizophrenic transvestite armed with a butcher knife? And you thought he was bad in 4 Christmases. Number 7. A Nightmare on Elm Street. The only Elm Street movies we're watching have Wes Craven's name in the writing credits, but since that amounts to 3 films, the remainder are only palatable thanks to the participation of the man synonymous with Freddy Krueger, Mr. Robert Englund. Elm Street 2010 tries to start over with a new Freddy, Jackie Earle Haley, but it can't make the extremely familiar material seem fresh, so it resorts to knocking off scenes we've seen before, including an ending that viewers will see coming from a mile away. It's the same attitude that Platinum Dunes brought to their remakes of The Hitcher and Friday the 13th. Let's give them what we think they want and get out of here. Needless to say, such an attitude didn't go over well with critics. The back-to-back beginning approach unimaginatively goes through the motions, wrote one, offering scant reason for its existence, at least from an artistic point of view. Yikes. Number 6. The Eye. Directed by Danny and Ogseed Pang, The Eye opened in Hong Kong in May 2002, 4 months after Mark Pellington's The Mothman Prophecies was released in the US. Both movies feature a haunted protagonist who realizes that they're being warned about a forthcoming tragedy, but their similarities were written off as coincidental, and The Eye went on to become a smash hit that led to 3 sequels. By the time the remake reached American multiplexes in 2008, the story's similarities to The Mothman Prophecies, not to mention The Sixth Sense, seemed less like coincidence than outright theft. What's more, audiences had had enough of Ghost after watching What Lies Beneath, Fear.com and Gothica, and they weren't in the mood for another supernatural drama, certainly not one starring Jessica Alba. After opening at number 2 at the US box office, the movie crawled to a $31 million domestic haul before disappearing from multiplexes. A year later, Paranormal Activity opened and rewrote the rules for ghost stories, effectively destroying any interest in the franchise. Number 5, The Omen. You can say this much for this remake of Richard Donner's 1976 movie. It had a great gimmick. Released on June 6, 2006, The Omen should have been the Citizen Kane of creepy kids films, but it wasn't. Part of the problem was the fact that by this time, audiences had seen creepy kids in everything from The Sixth Sense to Scary Movie 4, and they'd had their fill of them, thank you very much. The rest was due to the fact that even for a remake from the future director of A Good Day to Die Hard, The Omen is a whole lot of blah. Set in London, but shot tellingly in the Czech Republic, this is less a revamp than a copy that lands with a thud whenever it attempts to be dramatic. There are scattered unintentional laughs to be had whenever young Damien attempts a 1,000-yard stare, love that haircut though, but otherwise it's just a trawl through familiar material. Donner's movie was the first installment of a trilogy, but this movie was so poorly received it didn't even merit a DVD sequel starring David Hasselhoff and Linda Blair, which is saying something. Number 4, The Amityville Horror. Following 2003's Texas Chainsaw reboot, Platinum Dunes again goes the remake route, but this time they've gotten their wires crossed. Are they remaking the Amityville Horror or The Shining? Cast in the good guy who goes nuts role is Ryan Reynolds, who's a more believable everyman than Jack Nicholson and less likely to devour the scenery. He's married to Melissa George rather than Shelley Duvall, so when they move into their new home with kids Chloe Grace Moretz, Jimmy Bennett and Jesse James, you kind of want them to live happily ever after. No such luck. They've barely settled in when taps and walls start dripping blood, windows open by themselves, furniture moves across the room, and, most chilling of all, fridge magnets spell out threats. There's drug humour when the stoned babysitter gets the munchies and tells all about the house's past, which somehow leads to her being locked in a closet with the ghost of a young girl Moretz has befriended. Yes, there are spooky kids in this movie, and after Godsend, Hide and Seek, Dark Water, etc., it's all a bit too much of a muchness. Normally, a ghostly voice that says, "Get out," is treated as kitsch, but here it's presented with a straight face and adds to the overall blandness. Number 3, Friday the 13th. Released on the 13th of February 2009, Platinum Dunes' Friday the 13th movie was rumoured to be an origin story that introduced a new timeline. Despite the film being the most successful remake of an 80s slasher, audiences sided with USA Today's critic who wrote, "While it's billed as a reimagining of the horror franchise, this Friday is more like a rehash, delivering just what you expect and nothing more. Dreary, dismal, and disappointing, the movie is a list of ingredients that have been slung together in a food processor, microwaved, and served up by a clueless fry cook. It was bad enough when cinema audiences shouted, 'He's right behind you!' before each kill, but the film achieves something that none of the Paramount sequels did. It manages to be boring. If you watch this movie, don't miss the scene where Aaron Yu, the token ethnic minority who provides comic relief, goes out to the tool shed. When Jason appears, Yu hands him a hockey stick and says, "This completes your outfit. What is this, Scooby-Doo?" Number 2, The Stepfather. Speaking of tawdry rip-offs, here's a new vision of Joseph Rubin's 1987 movie, updated to the era of cell phones and America's Most Wanted by J.S. Cardone and Nelson McCormick, the creative duo that also remade Prom Night. If you're not familiar with Rubin's version, it had Terry O'Quinn from Lost in a career-making turn as Jerry Blake, who roamed the country marrying widows before erupting into violence every time his perfect new family failed to live up to his harsh standards. onwards. Blake becomes David Harris in this remake, and like every other adult in the film, he's a one-dimensional clown. Pure evil and so indestructible that he must be made from liquid metal, David has two facial expressions, a fake smile that somehow fools everybody, and a sour snarl that means duck and cover. When we reach the final confrontation, which takes place on a rooftop during a thunderstorm while Hitchcock knockoff music plays, it's a reminder of how low-key the original was. Jerry Blake was stabbed and shot and died. He didn't get up and walk away after being stabbed in the neck, thrown through a wall, tossed off a roof, and sent crashing through a greenhouse. He died. Until they resurrected him for the next one, anyway. Number 1, When a Stranger Calls. Probably gunning for Halloween's sophisticated suspense, the makers of this needless reboot turn the killer into a barely seen psycho who's a dab hand at finding hiding places and enjoys taunting people more than killing them. It's also one of those movies where the cops say, "There's nothing we can do," despite the mounting death toll, and the screaming damsel in distress backs herself into a corner shouting, "What do you want?" Merry tales of psychotic child killers don't lend themselves to PG-13, so the filmmakers do away with all the nastiness from Fred Walton's 1979 original, as well as 86 of its 97 minutes, which leaves the opening sequence of a babysitter being informed by police that the malicious call she's been receiving has been coming from inside the house. Anyway, the attempt to stretch an 11-minute sequence to feature length means that When a Stranger Calls often feels like a one-act play, with a single character on a single set reacting to shadows, strange noises, the sudden arrival of a stranger, etc. This is apparently because we're watching a 2-act movie, whose makers forgot to give it a rousing finale. The scene is set, the tension is ratcheted up by false scares, then 10 minutes before the credits roll, the killer puts in an appearance, gets captured by police, and that's all she wrote. And there you are, the 10 horror remakes so bad they never got a sequel. But let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, click that subscribe button as well as the little notification bell to be notified of any new videos coming your way. But for now, I have been Kirsten from What Culture, and I will see you in the next video.